Ladies and gentlemen, to start us off, I think we need to understand deeply the policy landscape within which we're operating both here and abroad. And I think few people are better placed to give that view than our first speaker. Marissa, you've already alluded to Khulekani Mathe, who's Chief Executive Officer of BUSA, that's Business Unity South Africa. And this organization really is at the heart of business government engagement and represents South Africa at the B20. And it's going to shape some of those critical policy recommendations. And I'm hoping, Khulekani, today you'll share how those dialogues are evolving and what they mean for the movement of skills and talent. A very warm welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the invitation, Marissa. And I did something today which I hate when it's done by others, because I made you wait. This is reserved for politicians. It is in the job description of a politician to make people wait for you. But two things conspired against me. One was I had a meeting with some of my members to resolve some issues. That always happens. And the second thing is that traffic this morning on Main Road was just unforgiving. And I think that we need to really examine what that Joburg bomb squad is doing if we continue to have traffic like this. So just a couple of thoughts before I hand back to Jeremy. You know, many years ago, so I'm very careful not to reveal my age, but many years ago, I traveled for the first time to the United Kingdom, and I could travel to the United Kingdom visa-free. Does anybody remember that time? Yes, so some of you are old enough. You're about to join Jeremy on that critical skills list. So I was going there as a student in the United Kingdom, a postgraduate student, and it felt really good. I mean, I felt like I was some sort of special African, you know, who could travel to the UK visa-free when everybody else was complaining about it. Today, we have to pay some ridiculous amount to get to the UK. Not only that, we get asked all kinds of questions. And just last week, one very senior executive of a global company, just happens to be South Africa, based in South Africa and responsible for the continent, was traveling in Europe, took a flight that needed to land in Heathrow for her to connect back to South Africa. And those smart people of Britain demanded that she should have a visa, a transit visa, and she had to be separated from her family and her 5-year-old child. It was drama, right? This is what we have to live through today. But that was not the case back then when I traveled. And then I'm not going to tell you when, but you will probably figure this out anyway, because I then traveled to, and I see somebody from Barclays, so you came just in time to hear how the people of your country are treating us. And I then traveled also to the United States, and I went there. It was in 2004. I had a nice new pair of shoes in my bag. I was going there for a World Bank conference. Nice new pair of shoes. I wanted people to see me properly, right? But being 2004, which is after 9/11, I just happened to be the randomly selected person. Have you ever been randomly selected? Can I see a show of hands of people who've been randomly selected? Okay, wonderful. So you've escaped that, Jeremy. Good on you. So I happen to be one of the people who were randomly selected for extra scrutiny. Let's just put it like that. And so I was sent to a room where I was asked a whole lot of questions, and I answered the questions. It didn't take very long. It's all clear. What I didn't realize was that my bag had a slightly more difficult time than I did. So I had it very easy. I mean, I hear people tell stories of being in those rooms for like hours. I was in there 15 minutes and they're like, all good, they let me go. And then a while later, I get connected with my bag. And I didn't notice too much until I got to my hotel room. So I'm unpacking, and inside my bag, I find that my brand new pair of shoes was broken, like literally broken. And they put a little note that, well, they did this for security reasons. And apparently, because I don't know whether they still do these things to shoes, but shoes used to have this piece of steel to hold it together, in the sole of the shoe. And so apparently it beeped too many times for their liking, and they broke my shoe to make sure that it was what it was, right? And so there I was in this important conference without my brand new pair of shoes. And as you can imagine, that was the first time, by the way, I went to the United States. As you can imagine, I formed a view, right, about the United States, about whether I would like to come back to this country that broke my spanking brand new pair of shoes. And that view stayed with me for a very long time, until today. So sometimes my job requires me to go to the US, and I'll go. But you'd have to pay me, right? Just as my job does, to voluntarily go to the United States, right? Because I formed this view, and I can't help it, but I felt violated, I felt ill-treated as a visitor to this country. Now, of course I understand 9/11 happened, it was horrible, so they needed what they needed to do. But I still formed this view. And so I think these things matter, the views that people form when they move around the world. And of course I could tell you many other stories about traveling and the things I like, more or less about different countries of the globe. And I'm sure you too have your own views about which places you would like to go back to again and again. Often it is because of a couple of things, right? How easy it was to get into that country matters most. It matters how you were treated by the officials at the point of applying for a visa, entering the country, staying in the country, and all of that stuff. It also matters whether the bed you slept on was clean, like the linen was clean, and the bed was just the right sort of softness that you want. And then, of course, whether the people were nice and friendly to you. So we form views based on these things about, do I want to go back? Some of these things obviously matter more than others, but all of them matter nonetheless. So why do I waste your time in the morning to talk about these things? It's because just like I have traveled to a few countries, you have all traveled to many, many countries. The lifeblood of the global economy is, in fact, the movement, right? The movement of people, the movement of goods, the movement of money, the movement of technologies. All of these things power the global economy. Now, and dare I say that these things, and perhaps a few others, are inseparable, right? You just can't have rules that move capital alone, right? That are really good for capital movement, bad for the movement of people, right? Or you want the movement of technologies, but you don't want the people to move. You don't make it easy for. So these things are all interrelated. So if we accept that the global economy is about the movement of goods, is about the movement of people, is about the movement of capital, and is about the movement of technologies that power the economy, then we've got to sit back and say, do we have the right kinds of rules that facilitate this? Because essentially it becomes how good your rules are, how enabling your rules are, will determine how you fare in this game of development, the game of movement forward, and the game of advancement in the global economy. And so as a student, I visited, now as a student of a foreign direct investment and development finance at some a university in the UK. So it's the University of Manchester. It's not just some university. It is the University of Manchester. And so part of the program was that we had to visit a developing country to learn about these things, about what the movement of finance does to the development of a country. And so in their wisdom, they shipped us off to Bangladesh, right? That was my first time going to Bangladesh. And got to Bangladesh, there was a sense of a rush that we saw. Firstly, I will tell you this, get to the airport and the numbers of people at the airport. Something I had never seen before, not in this country, not in any of the countries that I'd been to before. Like large numbers of people, crowds. And so I started wondering, is the Queen of England about to visit Bangladesh or something of that sort? And I asked. And they said, no, this is just normal. This is how Bangladesh is. And fast forward, did very successful trip, lucky to meet with the central bank governor of, governor of the Central Bank of Bangladesh. It was Dr. Fakhruddin Ahmed. And so he, amongst many things, he told us about his country. But because we were finance students, he also told us that as a poor country, by the way, Bangladesh, very poor country. When it became an independent state in the 70s, it was written off as a basket case. In fact, somebody used these words somewhere in Washington. So this is a basket case. This will never survive as an independent state. And so you can look at the stats for yourself today, how Bangladesh is doing, but it was still very poor at the time we went there. But he said something that stayed with me because I had not thought about this previously. And he said, one of our important sources of development, finance for development in this country is in fact remittances by Bangladeshi people abroad. At the time, the number, the actual value was something like $3 billion US. right? That's more than 20 years ago. So this was a significant amount of money for a poor country. So he talked about everything, but he said one of the significant sources of development for our country is remittances. And so it also tells a story about letting people into your country, or letting your own country people, citizens, whatever, go to other countries. It matters just as much. So South Africa as a country has obviously experienced a lot of movement of people into the country. This report that was published last January by the New South Institute, actual author of the report is my former boss, Alan Hirsch. Lovely human being. If you must meet a lovely human being, you should meet Alan Hirsch. And the report says that between 2001 and 2021, the foreign-born population in South Africa increased by about 150%, from just 958,000 to 2.4 million people. And the World Bank generally found that in a country, a 1% increase in the immigrant population from one period to the next raised local employment by 0.2%. So it could be 0.1, it could be 0.5, whatever. But the point is that there is actually something positive about people of other countries entering your country. It's net positive is the message from this report. Of course, we know in South Africa, for a whole host of reasons, there are issues about immigration and all of that, and so on. How we manage immigration is an issue, and the colleague from Home Affairs will or must talk about that, if I can say so myself, because migration is one of those issues that not only are they important for development as I have described, but they're also very susceptible to political machinations. Okay, basically can be used by politicians, good and bad politicians, in ways that are really, really destructive. I don't have to say more than that, do I? Okay, if I have to, politicians used migration as a tool to achieve what they want to achieve. We know in this country what politicians say about immigrants to South Africa. We know that. We live through that every day if you live in this country. But we also know that the elections today around the world, whether it's in Europe or the Americas or everywhere, they are fought and won on immigration policy, right? So this is one thing that is absolutely central to driving the global economy, and yet gets given to the hands of people you should not trust with anything you value, politicians that is, and it gets abused in ways that divide societies and create all manner of problems that we currently experience in the globe. So we've said that migration helps because it contributes to the human capital stock of the country, the receiving nation, but it also contributes to the gross national income of the sending country. It sometimes leads or follows foreign direct investment into a country, but also it is responsible for the transfer of know-how and technology, as we've said. Let me go back to the metric that I've used, which is remittances in Bangladesh. So in 2004, remittances in Bangladesh accounted for 5.5% of GDP. By 2024, last year, it accounted for about 6% of Bangladeshi GDP. Okay, so the central bank governors believe in this being a really critical source of development for finance was not misplaced. If you come to the African continent in 2004, and these are estimates because we didn't keep data very well, in Nigeria, remittances accounted for 1.67%. And here we're talking about personal remittances, by the way. We're not talking about companies, multinationals repatriating profits. We're talking about personal. Accounted for 1.67% of GDP. By 2023, 5.65%. In India, 3.4% of GDP in 2003, and now 3.4%. Now the numbers for South Africa are actually very interesting. Of course, you could look it up for many countries. There isn't necessarily a pattern here. I've just handpicked countries. But the numbers for South Africa are very interesting because in 2004, remittances accounted for 0.18% of GDP and currently account for 0.182% of GDP. So it hasn't moved. There's a big question there, why that is so. Because on the one hand, we also know how many South Africans have left South Africa to go to other countries. So I just leave that question for policymakers to tackle. But there's something there that's not working the same way it works in other countries. We also make it so hard for people to visit here just to have fun. Just to come and see our animals in the Kruger National Park. That thing is so important. There are not many countries that have the Kruger National Park and various other attractions, and there are many in this country. We make it near impossible for people to come into this country, at least those who want to do so legally and officially through, you know what I mean? It's easy for others. You try to come to this country through the front door, it's near impossible. And yet we know that when tourists come into a country, they bring along foreign exchange that helps create jobs in a country. But we make it difficult and almost impossible. So let me move away from this. Here I'm just suggesting to you that there are some policy bottlenecks that we have as a country, where different policies aren't working together to allow what I said at the beginning, the movements that are necessary to drive the global economy and to drive this economy which has been doing so badly for many, many, many years. So internally, we know that just moving goods, because we are a country where most production happens inland here, and perhaps a little further north of here, but the ports are 500, 600, 700 kilometers away, right? So we make cars here. We know that we are a small economy that needs to export our product. We make it here and then we have to cut it 700 kilometers out of the country. And then of course, we had a very reasonable rail network, reasonable, well looked after, working, but we've allowed that to collapse. Our ports were at least about the best on the continent. Yes, the cost issues were there. We know that we were one of the most costly ports to process things through, but they were functional. They too have actually gone through a seriously bad patch, in part because the rail and the ports are managed by the same state monopoly. And so when that began to collapse, we jumped and said to government, let's work together. We need to resolve this. Because the numbers on the economy started to show. Jobs were getting lost. If you look at the financial, the bank reviews, for the past 2 years, the Reserve Bank said that the logistic bottlenecks alone subtract 2% from our GDP growth, right? So not facilitating the movement of goods just internally has cost us and continues to cost us a lot. And so as business, we went to government and we said, we really want to work with you. This is hurting us. We need to solve this problem. But of course, there was the energy problem, which was crippling the economy. You just could not have more than 4 hours of production. Around 2022, it was really bad, where you would have like stretches of time with no power. So again, very, very crippling. So we approached government and we said, we would like to work together with the government. Started a partnership June 2023, and amazingly, it actually worked well. From a period where the relationship between business and government wasn't great, necessity forced us to work together and have worked together and have largely, not completely, but largely solved the energy problem, right? So we might still have a day or two in a year or a month of load shedding, but from a generation point of view, that's largely solved, okay? Because I don't want to exaggerate here. There are other issues of infrastructure, sort of distribution infrastructure that's owned by municipalities that will break from time to time because it has not been properly managed and maintained. But we solved that because we worked on a partnership. On the transport and logistics side, when we agreed to work with government, Transnet's volumes were going down like this. From having reached a peak of about 200 million tons or thereabout in 2017, they were down to 149 million tons 3 years ago when we started saying, let's work together. And of course, those volumes lost amounted to revenues lost and jobs lost. So it's a job bloodbath out there. What we've managed to do is, in the first year, we were able to turn that around, at least stop the decline. So the volumes moved to 152 million tons, and the following year, 162 million tons, and the target for this year is about 180 million tons. They might not make it, but at least the direction is upwards. What this economy, of course, needs is something above 200 million, 200 to 230 million tons. So again, we're way below on that. As part of these changes, there's been a whole lot of reforms that need to happen, both in the energy space, on the transport and logistics. So we're working together with government to really drive some big reforms in this country that should unlock the growth potential of this country. There's one piece that the president insisted we add, which is youth unemployment, or youth employment. He insisted on this, and we kept on saying, Mr. President, job creation is a product of growth. You can't just do it outside growth. So we should actually be focusing on growing this economy, and you're going to start seeing jobs. Until some really excellent work was done by, again, other private sector entities like Harambee that show that even when the economy grows in South Africa, the youth benefit less compared to older people. So there's a youth bias, there's a bias against young people in this economy. And so again, we need to undertake reforms that address that. And then we looked at which sectors here are able to grow even when the economy, the domestic economy, is not growing. Identified those as the tourism sector, right? So if we want to grow the tourism sector, there are certain things we need to do. Happy to say that the Ministry of Home Affairs has really been responsive. Marissa knows about this. This is what she does for a living. Has really been responsive, working with the private sector to try and resolve these issues. So in the last few years, we've seen positive momentum, positive energy, and a willingness from government to work together to undertake reforms that you could not even mention a couple of years ago. And this is not just between government and business. Internally within government, certain things were swear words, right? The cause of sort of ideological differences depending on where we sit. Today we work together with government. Today we are undertaking these massive, massive reforms which we support as business, and hopefully those will unlock. I do want to say that there is a long way to go, because to really get this economy going, to benefit like the rest of the economies, we do need to unlock the bottlenecks on the mobility of people, the mobility of finance, the mobility of goods, the mobility of technologies, and so it goes. We have got to remove these bottlenecks to power the South African economy. But the willingness is there. And so thank you very much for having me this morning.